Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Wilson Stribling. Welcome to another edition of At Issue, where we discuss and debate the critical issues facing the state of Mississippi and how these issues impact you. And we want you to share your opinions and comments with us. Just go to facebook.com/MPB Online News. On Twitter, our handle is @MPB News. Also, visit our webpage, mpbonline.org/issue. Also, you can check us out, MPB News, and all of your favorite shows on our new MPB app. It is free to download for your Apple or Android device. The big story, state agencies making plans to absorb deep budget cuts for 2017 on top of cuts in the second half of the current fiscal year. State revenue collections are millions of dollars behind projections. MPB's Mark Rigsby spoke with House Appropriations Committee Chairman Herb Frierson about making some tough budget decisions.
First off, it wasn't easy conversations, and nobody took a lot of satisfaction in what we were doing. Buck and I, as we reconciled the difference between the House and the Senate so the conferees would have an amount of money to work with, we anguished over it pretty late at night, 2 nights in a row. We come to those decisions with the help of our LBO analyst and the notes that we had taken and acquired while talking to the agency heads, and we just did the best we could with the cuts in the anticipated revenue that we were dealing with. You know, we went 0.3% below the revenues we collected in the previous year, and that just created a lot of havoc. And we had some big ticket items we had to pay along with that. Some agencies did get cut a little deeper than others, but we just did the best we could with it in a short period of time.
Did the passage of Senate Bill 2362, which calls for putting agency special funds into the general fund, how much did that help construct the fiscal year 2017 state budget? And
considerably.
How much did that also possibly hurt those individual agencies that relied on those funds?
All right. The first question, yes, the whole budget hinged on it. I mean, we created an enormous amount of capital, of one-time money that we used for capital expense and to defray the cuts that the governor made last week. The cuts the governor made last week would have been much, much deeper had we not swept those funds and put them into a good amount of it into 16 to defray the governor's cuts or to reduce them. Now, how does it affect the agencies? Look, I'm not going to tell you this thing's perfect. It's going to have some unintended consequences, and the legislature meets every January and can deal with them. I know there's 1 or 2 agency people who are really uptight about it, and we're just trying to send a message to them, look, just make it to January, and we'll fix these things. There's not many big problems out there, but there is one at DFA, and we recognize that. And there's some smaller problems around there at insurance and at Secretary of State's, but we can fix them. And some of the problems that we ran into is just because there was a term we had never heard before, offline budgeting, to where they were using administrative fees on pass-through dollars to fund other things, and that wasn't showing up on our spreadsheets and all that. So, you know, it's going to work out, and it's not a bad idea to have more agencies in the general fund. And we can track the special funds, what used to be special funds that they collected, and make sure that they get them back the next year if they reoccur.
The director of the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency says getting less budget money will make it more difficult to respond to disasters. We spoke with Lee Smithson this week.
First and foremost, I understand the dire predicament that the state is in general with our budget. Revenues are down, and things are tough across the board. And I totally understand and am very sympathetic to the task at hand with the legislature on trying to pass the state budget. But my concern as the executive director of the Emergency Management Agency is to ensure to the people of the state that this agency is prepared to respond to any type of disaster that the state might get hit with. And going into this budget session, I thought we had a pretty good agreement. So the budget request that the agency had submitted to the governor and was approved and submitted to the legislature was $3.8 million. When I went in early February to defend the agency's budget, as all agency directors have to do, the Legislative Budget Office had reduced the budget by $262,000. And the reason why they did that was because, for whatever reason, the previous administration had some vacant full-time positions. So the legislature, the Legislative Budget Office for that matter, was going to cut 13 permanent positions, and the amount on that was $262,000. So I went in again in early February and asked if both the House and Senate budget offices, if they would allow me to fill those positions because I desperately needed them, would they not cut the money? And that was the agreement that we had. The caveat was that I had to fill all 13 positions before the 15th of April. I did that. So when we went in on the day of the conference, I was assured that the 109 full-time positions that we had requested, those positions would remain and that the money wouldn't be cut. So when I left at about 2:30 that Saturday, I was told short of $40,000 and perhaps interagency fees, we would not be cut at all. So that night, looking on the legislative website, the positions were not cut. The legislature allowed me to maintain the 109 full-time positions, but the $262,000 was cut. And the problem on that is I gave my word to the people that we hired that they would not be terminated. The problem with that is 13 people, $262,000, how do you manage that? Well, so much of their salary is a 50-50 match state salary with federal grant money. So really when you look at a $262,000 cut, you could be saying it's over $500,000. And so now the second order effect of having the money cut is I've got to go out and find the money somewhere. With the reduced budget, we're just going to be a lot slower in our response. And I don't think that the people of Mississippi, expect us to be very latent in our response due to budget cuts. They want us there, and they have the expectation that we're going to be there when they're needed. And that's my intent, is to serve the people of Mississippi regardless of what the event is.
The Department of Health is also bracing for budget cuts. The state health officer, Dr. Mary Currier, tells MPB's Mark Rigsby her agency will be forced to lay people off.
So our budget cut is about $4 million, which is about an 11% cut to the agency. We've already had to cut people in the field, so we have sent more than 80 of our employees home that worked either in the clinics or out in the state doing environmental services. And that's largely because we've had a decrease in our Medicaid income and a decrease in the number of patients. So we adjusted that this winter and spring, and that was a really tough thing. But now we have a decrease in $4 million for our state funds. So we're looking at our regulatory area to take a lot of those decreases. Those are fee supported, but we've had to supplement the fees with state funds because the fees don't pay for the services that we provide.
What is the Department of Health's budget for fiscal year 2017?
So that's a really good question. And the state funds for FY 2017 are about $36 million. But because of the way the budget was written this year and the way agencies that used to be fee supported are now state fund supported, we no longer have to pay some funds out to some agencies, but we have to use general funds to pay things like out to the hospitals for trauma care and for EMS and for domestic violence. Some of those funds have to come from the general fund appropriation. So even though the $36 million looks like it was just a small cut from last year, it's really a $4 million cut from last year after we took the cuts in 2016 that occurred during the year.
Can you talk more about the impact on people and services?
Mm-hmm. So if we're looking at taking a lot of our cuts in the regulatory area, it means that there will be longer waiting times for wastewater inspections and restaurant inspections. We do all kinds of inspections. We inspect tanning beds. We have to supplement everything we do pretty much with state funds, and there will be less state funds, so there will be fewer people doing those things.
Will you have to let people go?
We will be letting people go. There's no way we can take an 11% general fund cut without letting people go.
Do you know how many people at this point?
We don't know how many people at this point. We are assessing every dollar that we spend in state funds right now and seeing if it is core public health. So as we do that, we look at how many people provide those services and how many we'll have to send home.
So what does the next year look like for this department?
We will work through the budget. We'll do everything we can to maintain our services as best as possible. But when it comes to things like nursing home inspections and things like responses to a disaster of any sort, I don't know how we continue to do those things without having the funding to pay the people that do them.
We move now to the Reporter's Notebook. Joining us, as always, MPB's Paul Boger. Also joining us this week is Emily Wagster Pettus. She's the Mississippi State and House political reporter for the Associated Press. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks.
We're kind of looking back this week. Let's talk about probably the most talked about issue this whole session, House Bill 1523. Emily, we've not necessarily seen the end of that?
No, I think going forward there's a big potential for litigation. 1523, just a quick review, is the so-called religious objections bill. It allows workers to recuse themselves or not provide certain services if they have deeply held religious convictions against same-sex marriage. Roberta Kaplan, who's an attorney from New York, represented the plaintiffs in a 2014 lawsuit that challenged Mississippi's ban on same-sex marriage. Just this week, she's gotten in touch with Governor Bryant, sent a letter asking basically some follow-up questions on how 1523 is going to be implemented. The people who work in circuit clerk's offices or local judges are supposed to file forms with the state registrar of vital statistics in the health department if they're going to recuse themselves from providing marriage licenses or doing weddings for same-sex couples. So this attorney is now asking for documents that would show who has recused themselves in which counties, and she says that some legal action is possible if she finds that same-sex couples are being treated differently from straight couples.
Paul, any thoughts on the possibility of a special session this year?
We've heard calls for a special session a few times now. Most recently, the Secretary of State is asking the governor for a special session to re-examine an election omnibus bill that died in the last week of the session due to a small part of it being dealing with campaign finance reform. Lawmakers were, I guess, disturbed might be the right word to use. Some of them, at least, were disturbed by the language. They weren't quite sure how it would work or what it would do. So they killed the entire bill based on that one section. So, Secretary of State's looking at that. There's also calls, the governor himself has actually said that he might call a special session to look at the remainder of the 2016 budget. We've already had 2 rounds of tax cuts here in the state on the budget. So he might want to come in, look at how that's going to work. Also, what to do with the BP oil money. That's a big question that's hanging out there right now that didn't get answered during the session.
Emily, you've covered the Mississippi legislature since 1994. A number of people have called this year's session extraordinary. Particularly Democrats have said that. You've covered it for many years. How would you say it compares to other legislative sessions?
This is the year the Republicans attained their long-held goal of getting a supermajority in both the House and the Senate. And the Republicans clearly flexed their muscles this time. I mean, they clearly had the votes to do a lot of what they wanted to do. It was pretty easy for them to get some tax cuts through. There was a lot of frustration by the Democrats in both chambers, really, slowing up the process, expressing some frustration that they didn't have the numbers to influence the outcome of a lot of legislation.
How do you think the Democrats might respond, knowing the climate and how the Republicans are using the situation? How do you think they might respond next year?
I think we may see more of the same next year, unless there are some Democrats who find a way to, cross the aisle. And I mean, I'm not talking about them switching parties, but I'm talking about maybe finding a way to negotiate with the leadership on some things that they want. But I mean, honestly, at this point, the Republicans are very comfortable with a 3/5 majority. There may be some issues where they want to compromise with the Democrats, but there may be a lot of issues where They just don't want to, and they have the numbers, and they don't need to.
Don't need to, and the way the system worked this year, that was one of the complaints among the Democrats, is that there wasn't an opportunity to negotiate or to debate because so many things were handled off the floor.
Yes, I mean, there were a lot of Democrats who really just frankly felt shut out of the process.
Paul, what about the crystal ball for you? What do you picture for next year?
I think Emily's exactly right. You know, talking to some members, especially members of the Black Caucus, they especially feel, I think, their voices have not been heard over the last several years, as a matter of fact. They point to committee chairmen, the lack of committee chairmen from the Democrats. They look at their bills not being fully vetted or pushed through the process at the same rate, or at least in the same proportion that Republican bills are. So I think, you know, speaking to a lot of them, they say this is the new normal. Expect this next year. This is what we're going to do because it's our only legislative tool. New normal? That's what we're going to have next year?
I think so, yes.
All right. Emily Wagster Pettus of the Associated Press, Paul Boger of MPB News, thank you both for being here as always.
Thank you.
Thanks.
A member of Mississippi's House of Representatives has announced she is stepping down. Representative Kimberly Campbell made the announcement on Facebook. She says she will always love the citizens of House District 72, and she's leaving on her own terms. She has served as vice chair of the House Judiciary B Committee and as vice chair of the Banking and Financial Services Committee. Campbell is a Democrat and has represented District 72, Hinds and Madison counties, since 2008. She will leave at the end of May to become the state director of AARP. Let's get straight to the point now with views from both sides of the aisle. Austin Barbour is a Republican national strategist. He's the founding partner of Clearwater Group. Brandon Jones is a Democrat. He's an attorney with the Barria Jones law firm and a former member of the House. Good to have you both with us, as always. Let's talk about the session now that it's over. Austin, your overall assessment of this session.
Listen, I think what's important, kind of go step back here just for a second, what's important for our elected officials to try to focus on in Mississippi, and I think they did some of this session, is sort of four main things, education, healthcare, infrastructure, and how do we create a better environment for higher paying and better jobs to come to Mississippi. And I think when you look at education, I think under the leadership of this Republican-controlled legislature last term as well as the beginning of this term, they've done a fantastic job. Of course, the big issue this year was removing the district lines for charter schools that would keep kids in C, D, and F schools from being able to, let's just say, leave inner city Jackson to go to a school that may be in Vicksburg. Or Forest or Yazoo City. I think that's great. I think what they're doing with education is doing fantastic jobs, and what they're trying to do with tax cuts, I think they're doing a really good job. I think next year they'll try to focus on Medicaid. I think next year they'll try to focus on infrastructure. But to me, those are the four main things that, you know, we as a state have to do to improve our situation to make it a better situation for those of us who live here in Mississippi.
Brandon, your assessment?
Well, you know, this is why Austin is the best in the business. He has a way of talking about these things. I was listening to that. I almost for a second became convinced that it was a good session, but alas, the effect wore off. This was a bad session. This was a bad session in almost any way you look at it. Starting with the general bills, we have House Bill 1523, which has already invited litigation. We've got the Jackson Airport bill, which really seemed pointless and ticky-tack, and now it's inviting litigation. And what was left undone was a big deal. We didn't address infrastructure. I mean, Austin mentioned two very important things, Medicaid and infrastructure, which we didn't even deal with during this session. Election reform, campaign finance reform. These are things that we all left on the table. We look at the budget, we're $122 million underneath where we said we would be a year ago. The governor has already had to go in and tweak it twice. The latest tweak came one day after we announced this latest round of tax cuts. I'm convinced we'll have to raise taxes because of these tax cuts, so I hope people enjoy the moment. And then a bond bill that we didn't get a chance to talk about last week, but you know, I'm looking over the state treasurer's statements, loaded with what can only be described as earmarks. State credit rating in jeopardy. You can't use a bond bill to pay salaries and routine operating expenses. Can't be used for projects that are recurring. By objective standards, this was a rough session, and look, I hope that we have 3 years to do something completely different.
You know, Wilson, Brandon hit a whole bunch, and I don't have enough time to address each one of those as much as I would like to. But Brandon knows this. You got 122 individual members in the House. You got 52 individual members in the state Senate, and they have different priorities. They just do. Some of them are far right guys, some of them are far left, some of them are more in the middle, some care about social issues versus education issues. And it's part of the process. You have to deal if somebody wants House Bill 1523 or somebody wants a bill dealing with education. That's just part of the process. And sometimes you just can't get to everything. I wish that they could have gotten to infrastructure this year, highways and bridges, but they just didn't. I have full confidence they will. They tried in the House to get to, and I think pass what was probably going to be a really good campaign finance reform bill, but it did not make it through the process. I think next session, I wish it would have happened this session, but it didn't. They could have dealt with Medicaid. Medicaid is such a big issue. You know, you could spend weeks and weeks on Medicaid trying to get that through the process. But I'm really excited about what they have done on education and what they've done with getting rid of the franchise tax, lowering the personal income tax. Those are big things that they're working on.
It's a really diplomatic way of saying some of these people may be crazy.
No, I'm not saying that at all. Some people just have different priorities.
Yeah.
I mean, some people, listen, anytime you deal with social issues, whether you're having this conversation in your house, with your wife and your parents, or whether you're dealing with it with 122 members in the House, it's going to be toxic at times, and it's going to create the kind of environment that it did this session. But listen, man, everybody just has their different priorities.
That's right. Well, you know, the youth legislature is in session this week. Seniors, or I believe is who comes up from different high schools across the state.
Their priorities are pizza and Coke.
And they go and they pass laws. Now, I don't know what the youth legislature passed, but I think there are many of us in this state who would take sight unseen whatever the youth legislature did and replace it with what the real legislature did, and we'd probably be a lot better off.
You talked about, Austin, the numbers in the House and Senate, and that everybody has different opinions. Obviously, that's the case. This is the first time, though, that a supermajority of those people have been Republicans. Is this the new normal now that we have a Republican supermajority at the Capitol?
I don't think so, and I think maybe what you're trying to get to, is it going to be this contentious every session? I don't think so. I think next session they'll get, I think the two big issues, I have not talked to anybody about this, but my gut is campaign finance, infrastructure. We're talking about highways and bridges, our state highways and bridges, and then Medicaid. Those are three big substantive issues, particularly 2 and 3. I think those will be the issues that they really try to talk about this summer and this fall leading up to the session, and those are the issues that they work on versus some of these other issues that are just so contentious. And I think you'll see the Democrats will go, all right, we can have a real policy-oriented conversation or argument or disagreement with Republicans and leaderships about Medicaid or about how we go improve our highways and bridges. And we can all walk away not hating each other, like sort of what we saw on some of the issues this year. I think that's where we'll head to in 2017, Brandon.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. We want to talk about those issues as Democrats. We want to talk about better roads and bridges. We want to talk about what can we do to improve health care. And so if we come back, and that's what the priorities are, and we truly spend several months debating best policy for those positions, man, I think you will see the air become a little bit less burdened. I think you'll see people able to talk a little bit better. But, you know, I'm channeling my own inner President Nixon. We're in the vast minority. You don't have us to kick around anymore. When you talk about a contentious session and folks not being able to get things done, Republicans have only themselves to blame. They have their back to the wind. They don't need a single Democratic vote on anything that goes on over at that chamber. And so we are kind of bit players in this thing. Our frustration and my frustration comes more from the standpoint of standing outside and watching what ills our state has, and are we doing things in our government to address those?
Yeah, and I think Republicans, they obviously do have a big majority in both chambers. The philosophies, no doubt about this, of Tate Reeves in the Senate and Philip Gunn in the House and most of their leadership is, we believe that we can provide services. The state agencies in Mississippi can provide services in a more cost-effective way. And we can do that with less money coming into the general fund than we have now. We think we can provide all the things that we need, the safety nets that are there for the poor people, great educations, better education systems. Some districts are great, some are obviously failing. We can figure out these big priorities, and we can just do it for less dollars than we have coming in right now. I think that's where they're trying to get. I think that was their big sort of mindset this session, Brandon.
Having been a part of this process, my take is that Mississippi's problem has never been throwing too much money at the problem. But the truth is, efficiency in government is something that most voters want. And so I don't disagree that that's an important thing to do. I think the problem with what we've done with this latest round of budgeting is we have state agencies that don't have the means to perform the jobs they were appointed to perform. And these are Republican folks. These are folks who were appointed by this governor and the past governor. They're supposed to be sympathetic to this government, and yet they're coming out and saying the head of MEMA is a great example. Not only could we not handle a Katrina, we probably couldn't handle a Hurricane George if it came right now with these current round of budget cuts. So, Austin, let's be responsible, but let's make sure we have the tools in the tool bag to do the jobs we need them to do.
I understand that.
Brandon, Austin, thank you for another great season.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we are out of time. We thank you for joining us. Good night.